I mean, the issue of skin lightening or skin bleaching, which translated means someone who's changing their normal healthy skin color to a lighter shade for whatever reason.
Yeah.
And most of it is, it's a really social political issue. Having started long time ago, racism, and also with the slaves in America, where it was thought that if you have a lighter skin, you are better off. And again, if one looks at the history in America, the papers report that with regards to the black slaves from Africa, if you had lighter skin, you were allowed to work indoors and cook for your masters and clean. Whereas if you had darker skin, you were then tasked to work in the fields, outdoors. So, in actual fact, skin lighteners, initially when they started, they were used by the white ladies. And the thinking behind at that time was that if you were darker, or with the light skin, you get more tanned and brownish if you're exposed to the sun. So if you tanned and brownish, it means that during holidays you could afford to go, on holidays and suntan. And if you were lighter, you actually, couldn't afford to go on holidays. So what happened is that then there was this notion that people who were the poor farmers and the poor whites who were working outdoors, they tend to be brownish and suntanned. And then that depicted that they are working outdoors, they are from a lower socioeconomic class. And then they started using their the skin bleaching creams to make their skin lighter. And then of course with time it became the opposite, that if you are tanned, you can go on holidays and suntan. So these are all the dynamic. And then again, so I've mentioned looking from the African's point of view, depicting the history in America and during apartheid in South Africa. And I've also mentioned to you the white population, how they looked at skin bleaching. So now I'm moving on to the Indian population. So with the Indian population, again, there's a caste system, which you may know about, which is much more rife in India. And there are still bits and snippets of it here in South Africa because of our population comes from India. And in that regard, again, if you are darker amongst the Indian population, it is felt that you come from a lower caste. Whereas if you are lighter, you come from a more privileged upper class. And therefore, even with regards to marriage, it would be an issue if, one marries somebody who's darker in complexion. So what they then would do, and you find that people who are darker, they would use skin bleaching creams to try and make their skin lighter. So that increases their propensity or chances of getting married. Where, again, there's discrimination amongst the black people themselves, whether they are lighter or darker. And then there's been this concept of yellow bone in South Africa, referring to people who are light in complexion, sort of giving the impression or perception that they are much more attractive compared to black people. Yellow bone.
Bone?
Yeah, they call them yellow bone. Yeah. So giving a misconception that they are much more attractive compared to darker skinned black individuals. So what we've been seeing recently, maybe in the last 10 years or so, is that compared to the past where skin bleaching was prevalent amongst the low socioeconomic or uneducated or unsophisticated perhaps rural people, we found that now it's common even in the middle class and celebrities. And you may have read about a number of people who've been bleaching their skin in the media. And we also observed that even men now are bleaching their skin. And it had now permeated even to high schools, where young girls or young boys in high schools were also using creams to make their skin lighter. Again, following the same concept. So it was no longer an issue of underprivileged, uneducated, unsophisticated group of people. And the other aspect of it was linked to xenophobia, So we've also conducted a study amongst non-South Africans, blacks, who naturally will be darker than the South Africans because of where they come from. It's much hotter.
Yeah, the Nilotic races have a much darker skin from the equator.
Pardon?
From the equator, around Egypt and Sudan and Nigeria.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there's a reason why they're darker, because it's very hot.
Yes.
So naturally the skin has to produce more pigment, more melanin to protect them. So it's a protective physiological mechanism, which people don't understand. But so when the African continent population were moving to South Africa for whatever reason, job opportunities, etc., they would be strikingly darker compared to the South Africans, and it would be easy to recognize them. And then when the issues of xenophobia popped up in South Africa, then they started using bleaching creams, so that it's not easy to distinguish them from the locals. So again, you can see the socio-political element in all these issues. There's actually a paper that was published by a colleague of mine from Senegal, where she published about 5 cases of patients developing skin cancer from long use of skin lightening creams. And the prevalence of skin lightening creams in South Africa from the data that we have was about 30%. Whereas if one moves to Africa, Central or West Africa, the prevalence is about 60 to 70%, which is quite high.
I was reading a case study from Mexico where some of the women, including who had young children or babies, they were getting artisanal creams in Mexico. They were working in Southern California, but their families were in Mexico, and when they went home, they bought locally produced skin lightening creams with very, very high concentrations of mercury.
From Mexico?
Yeah.
And they take it to California?
And that was causing neurological problems in the mothers, and in one case the child as well, and simply from rubbing, and it was on surfaces in the house at very high measurable levels. So, but I wonder, in South Africa, are you aware of skin lightening bleaching products produced locally in say a traditional medicine setting?
There are some products that we analyzed with a colleague, physical chemist colleague of mine. But when we discussed with the Cosmetic and Toiletry Association, they felt that they were not above the limit. So there's been some discrepancy in terms of what is allowed. 1 part per million, 1.1, So as you will know, I've sent some of those products overseas to verify and check what the proper concentration is, so that we can see whether they should be banned or not.
Yeah. And are those locally produced creams?
Yeah, they're locally produced.
That you would get from a traditional healer? Or?
Yeah, no, from the chemist or any of the supermarkets.
Okay. And do you get an idea of the costs of those creams?
They're very cheap, very cost effective. That's why people buy them. Because, for example, the reputable ones would be like 300 rands, 500 rands, 600 rands. Whereas these creams would be like 15 rands or 20 rands, so people can afford them.
Oh.
Yes.
So that is very cheap, yeah.
Yeah.
So that would be for what sort of, how many?
Maybe 30 grams.
30 grams.